Hi everyone. The lesson I chose to analyze for accessibility was my first lesson. That is the energy of sound. I just did this science lesson the other day and decided to give it a try, see how accessible it would be in the online format. What I found when I went through it, and you'll probably see as well, a lot of those tier one and two accommodations or modifications. If they weren't in this lesson, I think I pretty easily could have adjusted them for any receptive problems, kiddos who have problems with oral and written expression, and any attention problems. Um, like I said, even if it wasn't in this lesson in the face-to-face format, I feel like I could have even just very easily made some tweaks to the presentation um, to get the majority of that tier one and two accommodations met. Um, when it came to tier three, sort of the assistive technology, I will say I felt like at first I would have told you it was very much lacking. I met some of the accessibility marks, I think, and but as far as assistive technology goes, I just the way I present information, if I was to become an online teacher, I would have a lot of work to do if I had kiddos who had special needs for visual and hearing impairments, as far as the way that I presented this lesson in particularly. So anyway, getting into the lesson, my first slide, I had the kids get on my Google Classroom. They responded to a question I had set up for them to kind of get that prior knowledge going. And then I had kids come up to the board and fill in the correct compression, rarefaction, wavelength based off of the picture that was in front of them. So for the second slide, we reviewed sound transmission. We had done an experiment earlier in the unit where I was hitting a ruler off a desk, off some water, and just swinging it around through the air, trying to drive home the points about how the speed of sound is affected by what matter it's in. Um, so then I just presented this information to him again as a review once more about sound transmission through different states of matter. Um, this was just a quick check for understanding. So along with wanting them to know about the sound wave on the initial slide and what that meant to them, I wanted to make sure one more time that we were all on the same page with, the molecules and solids being packed close together and that thus transmitting sound the fastest. Moving to the next slide, this volume idea, we had briefly discussed it. So I made sure to get some bullet points in there about decibels and how we measure things and give them some examples about how loud decibels actually are with the jet engine, where pain can start occurring through how high decibels get at 130, and how over a long period of time at 85 decibels can cause hearing issues. And then I had the little bullet point about as the waves get taller, the decibel is greater, therefore the sound is louder. The one thing that I hadn't talked to the kids about up to that point was this idea of amplitude. Um, so this was a time in the lesson where I asked this guiding question, what is the difference between the two compressions below? And then the students had some time to turn and talk at their desk sets with each other, what they noticed the difference was. Then I used the two images to sort of go into, how great the amplitude is affecting the volume of the sound with the two contrasting compressions there. Um, After we went through that review, I did an activity that I call Table Experts. The name of the reading structure is escaping me at the moment, but basically it was I had an article that was separated into different sections, and I gave one part of that article to each table. So there was a heading that had a white box over it. So the first step was for students to develop a heading for the part of their article they were reading as a group. And then each student was in charge of taking notes that they did collaboratively. So the first thing they took notes on in their science notebooks was what was important in their section of the article. The second thing was what did they learn from it. The third thing was did it review anything that they already knew, kind of pulling that prior knowledge again. And then the fourth thing was there any important vocabulary that the rest of the class would benefit from. So the kids took about 10 minutes to read through it and get their notes organized. And after that happened, we went one table at a time, and they taught the class what their section of the article was about. Again, all the ideas were just reviews of things that we already talked about. The article just presented it in a different way than I had before. The last part of the lesson, sort of the final, show what you know type of thing, was we watched a Brain Pop video. Um, there's a link to the video here that I click on to get it to show the students, and then after the video was done, they were charged with trying to explain what sound was to a first grader, sort of keeping in mind that a first grader is not going to know the vocabulary you do. And I really tried to drive home that point where they had to take what they knew and rephrase it to help another kid younger than them understand some of the more complex things that they already know. Um, so that was basically the gist of the lesson. So real quick, I organized my thoughts into the three different sections. So I started with the online accessibility handbook for PowerPoint. So if this was an online lesson, I had the outline view uh, circled here in yellow because I felt like I met that component. Um, the slide layout, again, I used the slide, just basic slide templates from PowerPoint. I didn't get too crazy with them for this lesson in particular. And then the reading order was in order as far as that goes. The one thing that I didn't have much of, the images, the clip art shapes, I didn't highlight that one in yellow as something that I had because I just did not have alternate text, the images. That's not something I even took into consideration for doing. So that would be an area to improve on. Lists, I circled that because of the couple of things I did have at bullet points. I felt like they were formatted according to this table using the bullets. So again, I had that one highlighted. Links. So even though I had a link with the video, it was just a picture. So in terms of accessibility with PowerPoint, um, to make it better, I should have probably included where the destination is going, a little bit better of a description for it. Tables, I didn't have any tables in this particular lesson. So I obviously didn't have that one highlighted as evident in my lesson. As far as color goes, I felt like I used sufficient color contrasting. It's funny the things you don't really think about in a face-to-face setting. Um, I also didn't use any color to convey meaning either in this particular lesson, but I know I'm guilty of that in some other lessons that I have where one color means one thing for a group, and that kind of gives the directions for what they're expected to do based off of what color the directions are. Like table one might be blue, table two might be red. So yeah, I will say not in this lesson, but in other lessons, I'm definitely guilty of not making the text color accessible to all learners. Um, the video and the audio part of the accessibility for PowerPoints, I felt like I could have when I showed the video. BrainPop does give you the option to transcribe, and it also gives you the option for captions. But again, that wasn't something that I even took into consideration. And I thought what was interesting, an interesting point that I read was that, or that I heard, I should say, from the intro to this module, was that even the captions, even though, or closed captioning, even if you're not visually impaired, sometimes that can help you focus in on what you're listening to and what you're seeing. Some people prefer to read as opposed to just hear. So I think even heading forward, I might always have that closed captioning on just for my kiddos who have trouble with the attention part of it. That would be a good accommodation for them. Okay, so the second thing I went through to see how my lesson stood up was um, in the text, the UDL principles, the three principles. So the first principle about multiple means of representation, I felt like I could have had the text captions, the video content. Um, Again, if I had just selected that in BrainPop, which I'm going to do in the future, I really shouldn't have that highlighted in here, but I could easily incorporate that next time I use this lesson. Pre-teaching prior knowledge. So I felt like my intro with the Google Classroom and some of my questioning that I did there was, getting that prior knowledge in. Multiple examples of not and non-examples to highlight learning. In the articles, there was a bunch of examples of each topic within the sound. Um, I gave some examples in volume about where pain happens with hearing, and also some examples of how fast sound travels. So I felt like I hit at least a few examples for each topic that we were reviewing. Provide multiple entry points and flexible paths through content. So the reason I highlighted that one is because I felt like the lesson had the kids' types to respond, the multiple choice question to respond to, which I could have done a couple different things with that question. Um, there was reading incorporated into the science. There was writing incorporated in with the science. So I felt like there were a lot of entry points, and along with the chart with the drag and drop. There was just a lot of different ways the content was presented to the students. And then chunking info, each page was very much its own information. I felt like it wasn't too overwhelming. Um, some of the other things I missed, maybe weren't too pertinent to the lesson, but still they weren't in there for multiple means of representation. Okay, so moving on to principle two, the couple of things that I felt like I hit on were multiple ways of interacting, hand, keyboard, voice, whether they were writing in their notebooks, they were typing on Google Classroom, or they were talking with their partners about the differences between the amplitudes. Use spell check, grammar check, calculator, sentence starters, and concept mapping. I put that one in there mainly the spell check. When they were typing on Google Classroom, they had access to spell check. I could have used some sentence starters and concept mapping, but didn't in this case. So that could have been a way to enhance this principle as well. Goals and checklists, I put that on there, especially the checklist part, because I felt like the students had a checklist to go by with when they were writing their table expert responses. They had to do 1, 2, 3, and 4. Um, Using guiding questions for self-monitoring, I felt like that was prevalent in the lesson as well. Um, and then moving on to principle three, I felt like this wasn't obvious in my lesson, but the students always have a choice of rewards. So when they're answering questions, I'm giving them tickets, I'm giving them different types of rewards for participation to keep that engagement up. Providing opportunities to collaborate. They had a chance to turn and talk. They had a chance to read an article together. So there was definitely some collaboration in there. The peer tutoring and support I also took away. That might be a stretch for the tutoring, but they did have support when they were reading and taking notes with each other in the individual groups when they were reading their table expert article. And then the last one, prompts, reminders, and checklists to promote independent self-regulation. Again, I feel like having that list of things on the board was a good reminder for them. And then I had the kind of the writing prompt at the end about explaining it to a first grader. So that's why I had that last one highlighted. So the final thing before I run out of my time here, I did go through the Universal Design Learning Guidelines. I really felt like I only hit about half of them, according to the website. So obviously there was some room for growth there if I was marrying this face-to-face lesson with an online lesson.